after the fact where the victim is now the perpetrator and the perpetrator is now the victim. And that just drives me crazy.
Welcome to 30 Frames a Second. I'm Doshad Farad, standing in today for Nat Wood. Since 9/11, the religion of Islam and Muslims have come under heavy scrutiny, and also the religion of Islam has been often criticized as being a terrorist religion. Since September 11th, the history of Islam has been closely studied and analyzed, but there seems to be a concern among many African American Muslims that the image of Islam is oftentimes given a foreign face. We have with us a lecturer, noted author, the author of the book, several books, among them 45, 35, Now, The Continuum of Islam in America, as well as Making It Plain, very respected scholar and journalist, I might add, who goes around the country lecturing on the history of African American Muslims, Amin Nathari, to discuss with us such subjects as we mentioned. Hey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brother Doshad. Pleasure to be here.
Now listen, there seems to be a concern among many African American Muslims as I've traveled around the country that perhaps the image of Islam or African Americans are not given credit when it comes to Islam's development in America. How would you respond to that?
I think it's definitely a valid concern. Actually, it's a missing part of the narrative. We like to say among the African American Muslim historians and those people that are involved in the work that there is no black history without Islamic history and vice versa. So now that we see the emergence of Islam on the world stage, as you mentioned in the intro, where Islam is being watched and being studied, and for that narrative to not include the African American experience is problematic, and actually it shortchanges even the American public that's trying to learn about Islam, because now you're missing a key component that without that component, you can't really have a true understanding of Islam in America.
Just as a side note, within 30 minutes or about a half hour, we're going to open the show for call-ins. If you have any questions or comments for our guests, we'll flash the number up on screen. This is a live call-in show. We're being live streamed as we speak. Now, how far does African American roots go back? I should say, how far does African American Muslim roots go back in America?
Well, we can look at some of the available texts that are available in any library. There are a couple that we can mention, certainly Dr. Sylvian Diouf's work and among many others. And we can trace the roots of black Muslims, as for lack of a better phrase, back to the times of slavery. It's estimated that probably 30% of those of our forefathers that were brought here as chattel slaves were Muslim. And even up to that time, ending, 1800s, which we look at as being the high period, so to speak, of when slaves were brought over, there was an Islamic presence that continued. Even now, the historians are coming across a number of artifacts. I was talking with a brother who is doing some research in that field. He said that they go into certain churches in the South, and there's a couple of churches that they went in where you can see that these were churches that slaves had taken safe haven in the church, and they had inscribed on the back of the wooden pews in Arabic, La ilaha illallah, there's no God but the one God. So the presence goes all the way back. And certainly from a contemporary standpoint, we know that Islam has always been present among black people, certainly popularized by the time of the Nation of Islam from 1930 and then continuing, although that wasn't the only expression of black Islam.
Now, we understand that a few years ago, a movie came out that rapper Mos Def had produced, The Prince,
yes.
I believe The Life of Abdul Rahman Abdul Rahim.
Yeah, Prince Among Slaves. Yes.
Prince Among Slaves. Mm-hmm. Now, how valid is that movie? Was that typical during slavery for there to be ex-Islamic nobility? I don't want to say ex-Islamic, but Islamic nobility among the slaves?
No, certainly. It was accurate portrayal, certainly, and the research bears that out, that that was the accurate portrayal. So again, the tapestry of America is rich. I mean, Islam is embedded in the DNA. It's in the soil of America. So there's no way that you could have a discussion about Islam in 21st century America without connecting it to the African American struggle and African American experience from the time of slavery up to today's time.
Now, I remember right after September 11th, there were several articles in some of the various newspapers that said being Muslim in America. And the concern was by many African American Muslims, as I said in the opening, was that they were only going to immigrant Muslims, but weren't coming to African American Muslims. What do you think is behind that? Why do you think the media seems to only, there seems to be an attempt that some have said to lock out or delete the African American Muslim contribution to Islam? What do you think that's about?
I think there's a number of factors. One, I think that as African American or Black American Muslims, we're not as proactive as the immigrant Muslim community in terms of media engagement. So that's part of the problem, first and foremost. We usually wait for them to come to us, meaning the media, whereas the immigrants usually have built media apparatuses and they have embedded in their organizations, media components that actively go out and will pitch stories and will do everything they can to connect with media to help drive the narrative. And that's very important when you're a faith community and you're trying to tell your story. You have to be out there. You have to get in front of the story. I don't necessarily think it's so much of a media issue as it is an issue of just positioning. Lack of positioning by the African American community in many respects, and then the immigrant organizations basically being focused on media. I want to add one point. One of the issues that happened or that came to light during 9/11 was that the immigrant community made more noise in the media, partly because they, for the first time, were experiencing what African Americans had already experienced, being that demonized other. That's part of our experience that even predates or precede a person reverting to Islam or becoming a Muslim in America. So now that they came under that scrutiny, of course, their voices were going to be louder in speaking out against what they looked at as being Islamophobia, where we had already went down that road during the civil rights era and all of those things, even before we added Islam into the mix or into the equation.
Now, as I said to our audience, Amin is the author of, this is one of his books. As you can see, 4535 Now, the Continuing of Islam in America, as well as making it plain. These are some of his select writings, sermons, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to get more further into this book.
Okay.
Would you please explain the significance of the numbers that you use, 45 and 35?
Okay, well, the book, it captured a particular period of time, and it was the time that it was 45 years since the assassination of Malcolm X, as he's popularly known, also known as Al-Haj Malik Shabazz. And at the same time, it was also 35 years since the passing of the leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, and the beginning of the transition of the Nation of Islam into what we would describe as a mainstream traditional Islamic organization. So we wanted to look at those two periods of time and how those two periods of time impact Islam in America now as we go forward in 21st century America.
Now, you mentioned the time of the Nation of Islam. Now, you grew up in the Nation of Islam.
Yes, sir.
And your father was a minister.
Yes, my father. I'm the product of two teenage members of the Nation of Islam that joined the Nation of Islam. They accepted, that was their first introduction to Islam. They joined in the mid-60s, and they were able to use Islam as it was taught in the Nation of Islam to build the basis of a life, to build a family structure, to build all of these things that we know Islam, is part of. And they also were part of the transition, meaning as the organization evolved, they continued, as Muslims, but just within the Sunni tradition, and maybe we can talk about that a little better later.
Okay, now the reason why I asked you about your Nation of Islam background, I've read brochures of them discussing Islam in America, and although most of these brochures will say you have prominent African American Muslims such as Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Imam Siraj Wahaj, but I noticed it'll be a small paragraph that might say, well, African Americans contributed somewhat to Islam, or they made a small contribution to Islam in America.
Right.
How would you respond, for example, to people that say, and of course, we had Nation of Islam, but we also had the Moorish Science Temple.
Right.
How would you respond to Muslims outside and inside the African American Muslim community who say, well, you know what? Drew Ali and the Moorish Science Temple and Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, didn't teach true Islam. So therefore, we should not count that as part of the history of the development of Islam. How would you respond? I'm sure you've heard that before.
Yeah, we hear it a lot, and whether one agrees or disagrees that those two entities taught true Islam, and that's a discussion. That's a whole nother show. You can't exclude them from the narrative because both of those movements, the Moorish Science Temple, 1913, Newark, New Jersey, Nation of Islam that began in 1930 and that's continuing today, even in another iteration, another expression, those two things have left an indelible imprint on Islam in America. And there's no way you would be disingenuous to try to have a conversation about the history of Islam in America and not include those two organizations. Now, I have to say that certainly from an ideological standpoint, from a theological standpoint, we know that there were some things, some part of the doctrine and the teachings of both those organizations that would be problematic when compared to the traditional text, or as what would be called the Sunni Islam or the Sunni text. But however, we argue, and I always want to argue, that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. And those two movements did a great job of really appropriating Islam and taking the essence, the core of Islam, and appropriating it and giving it a message of specificity to the people that they were trying to reach. So even just for that in and of itself, you have to include them in the narrative.
Now, I want to take it to another aspect.
Okay.
How do many African American Muslims deal with the opinions of many black studies professors, say the Dr. Clarks, the Dr. Benz, the Dr. Malefia Santes, who would say that just as many people have said that African Americans shouldn't be Christians because of the slave trade.
Right.
But then you also have that school of thought of the people I just mentioned that say, well, African Americans should not be Muslims because the Arab slave trade, as they say, started hundreds of years before the European slave trade. How does you as an African American Muslim, how do you wrestle with that?
Well, there's some validity to it, but I look at it from the standpoint of the Arab slave trade had less to do with religiosity. And even when the people that were Arab slave traders, when they embraced or they encountered Islam, even the way that they dealt with slaves was far different than how the slaves were dealt with from the American context of how we understand slavery. Meaning that in those cases, and we see this from the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, that for those, he acknowledged that slavery existed, but there was a certain standard of treatment for slaves. The slaves ate what the owner ate. They were clothed like the owner. They were more considered indentured service than they were slaves.
But I'm sure you've heard now the notion that the European slave traders had learned their brand of slavery from Arab slave trade. I'm sure you've heard that.
Yeah, we've heard it. Yeah, we've heard it. And honestly, I haven't done enough research. I would defer that question or that analysis of that to those scholars who have done that research. But certainly, we're not going to make the Arab, to be unculpable, like they didn't have anything to do with slavery. We know that. But I think that for someone to take the argument that Muslims shouldn't be, or that African Americans shouldn't be Muslims because of slavery, it's just too broad of a stroke of a brush. And this would be tantamount to in today's time where a person would say, well, the Ku Klux Klans, were Christians. You know what I mean? These were just aberrations. These are things that happened, but that doesn't go to impugn a faith because people may have practiced some things that were, horrible, and ascribed it to that particular faith. So certainly there's works that exist upon that, that exist about that and that expound upon that. But certainly as it bears fruit to today's conversation, Islam in America, we know that the Islam that's practiced today throughout the world by, almost 2 billion people, 8 million people in the United States, that it's one that doesn't advocate slavery. The Islam that's practiced today is one that advocates all the things that the American society say that it stands for: freedom, justice, and equality, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Just in an Islamic context, we don't equate happiness with the acquisition of things like we would from the American context. We look at a broader definition of happiness.
Now, in terms of cultural identity, do you feel that within the African American Muslim community there seems to be a cultural crisis? In other words, being African American as opposed to being Arab. In other words, you may have heard some Muslims say that some African American Muslims may criticize you for wearing a suit as opposed to wearing a robe.
Absolutely.
How do you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, it's a problem. It's a challenge that we're facing as a community, where there's a segment of our community among the Muslim African American community, and it's funny because we don't find this as much among the immigrants community. And I really hate to use those terms because I don't want anyone from our audience to think that there's a divide in color between indigenous or African American and immigrant Muslims, but I'm using that just for the broader context of our conversation. It's a problem with people connecting cultural identity to Islam because no one's Islam or no one's practice of it or no one's perfection or lack of perfection of Islam has ever been defined by how a person dresses. Now, there was a time when I served as a full-time imam of a mosque, of a traditional Sunni mosque, and even now I go to speak at mosques throughout the country. There's certain mosques that I would never be able to go in and dress like this because automatically the stigma in their mind, it connects them back to the understanding of the Nation of Islam because this is how we traditionally dressed in the nation, except I wouldn't be allowed to wear this beard and all that. But the suit and the bow tie, that's something that is a staple of the Nation of Islam. Now, I always argue that because I'm not in the Nation of Islam, and because I'm a Muslim who says that they follow the Quran, follow the prophetic tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with an application that's fixed in where we are today, 21st century America, I shouldn't be defined by dress. No more than the days when I wore a thobe, that shouldn't have made me more religious or more righteous because I wore a dress that might be more culturally specific to Muslims in another part of the world. And this is a big mistake when this happens.
I want you, if you could, to describe. Now, we've spoken before in the past, and your father has had ties with Imam Wallace Need Muhammad and Minister Louis Farrakhan.
Mm-hmm.
If you would, briefly, how would you describe the impact of Imam Wallace Need Muhammad and Minister Louis Farrakhan on Islam in America? Because I'm noticing now, I've noticed this for quite some time since I was a teenager, whenever Muslims from other countries will come over to America, regardless of how much they may disagree with Louis Farrakhan or Wallace Need Muhammad, they will come visit them and regard them as, I once heard a sheikh in Syria, he referred to Minister Louis Farrakhan as Imam Wallace Need Muhammad's deputy.
Absolutely.
Please describe their impact briefly.
Well, first, I would say, first, let's back up. Right now, I'm involved in a national tour that I'm doing kind of around 20 years of my full-time Islamic work, Islamic service. And the theme that I'm speaking about in many places that I go is derived from the book. It's called The Continuum of Islam in America. But then it goes a step further. Exploring our history and assessing the present to build for the future. And in that presentation, I have this PowerPoint and all of this. I have a slide. And I have a slide that says the most influential figures in Black American Islamic history. And there's 4 people that I have in that slide. I have a picture of Don Elijah Muhammad. I have a picture of Al-Haj Malik Shabazz, popularly known as Malcolm X. I have a picture of Imam W.D. Muhammad. May Allah have mercy on him. He's passed away 5 years now. And Minister Louis Farrakhan. I look at those, I consider, and people may argue, you may agree or disagree, but to me, those are the 4 pivotal figures of not just Islam in Black America, but Islam in America. I argue that, for a number of reasons. You can't begin to measure the impact that those men had and have on Islam in America, particularly in the Black community. Even the whole idea of appropriating Islamic names in the Black community. This was something that came from the nation. It wasn't until a man was bold and courageous to say before the world that he's going to accept the name that he was given to be Muhammad Ali. He's not going to be Cassius Clay anymore. This began a whole tradition in the Black community of people changing their names and picking up African and Arabic names. So there's so many things we can look at from a cultural standpoint, from a religious standpoint, and many other ways that shows that those 4 men have had an impact that I don't know if in our lifetime or in the lifetime of the next generation we'll ever see any figures that have that kind of impact.
So what was it then about the, I should say, most of the men you mentioned didn't have college educations, but their impact was so great that you now have people on college campuses studying them. What was it about the education they receive, the informal education they receive?
Well, even aside from the education, you know, their education was gathered through what we call experiential learning. You know, they experienced the climate of the times that they came of age in, and they were able to take those things, and for each of those figures that we mentioned, for those periods of time, they were able to take their experiential learning and make that part of their message, and that was part of their attraction. So it wasn't a lot of just dogma grounded in just theory without a practical application. When you look at the Nation of Islam was so popular and even remains popular today in many areas of the black community because it actually gave people a tangible model, an example to look at on how a person can have a better life. You look at the most glaring example of how that model changed their life. You look at the story of Malcolm X. You know, probably his biography is probably the most widely read biography in academic circles. And you see the story of a man who was among the most wretched of the people. And he was able to take that message that he was taught and totally transform his life. And this goes to show the transformative value of Islam. And we don't see any communities where people need more of a transformative, I won't say fix, more of a transformative impetus than in the black community. So this is one of the main reasons why, you know, Islam has grown in the black community, and it's going to continue to grow even now as we see people in the prison. We know that Islam is one of the strongest and fastest growing communities in the prison, and we can look at that from a number of ways, but certainly the restorative factor that Islam has and that impact upon people is something that has to be looked at. And as you said yourself, even social scientists are examining the work of those men and how that relates to where we are now. I know that was a long answer, but it's really no short answer to that kind of, you know.
You're fine, you're on 30 frames a second. No, this is what we do here. Now, a growing concern among many African-American Muslims is that they're not building the way they used to do, say, 40 and 50 years ago, the way other communities, the way other Islamic communities are doing. What do you account for that? Why the apparent, some have called it laziness, some have even said unenthusiasm. What accounts for that? What do you?
I certainly wouldn't attribute it to laziness because we know as African Americans, and this, you know, carries over into Islam, as the Prophet told us, the best of you before Islam would be the best of you in Islam once you understand the religion. So I definitely don't attribute it to laziness or lack of resources. I would classify it or categorize it as a reshifting of priorities, especially for many people that came out of the experience of the Nation of Islam. So now in our quest to be more religiously authentic, we basically have shifted our priorities on acquiring Islamic knowledge and all those things, which are good. But I think that part of that happening is that we left, as I would call the grassroots struggle, or commonly put, to use a nation term, we left the idea of soldiering, community building, doing for self. And I always argue when I have conversations now, and you and I have had this conversation before, is that for many of us, we threw out the baby with the bathwater. You know, we didn't take the best practices from that movement and then put that into our religious experience now following Islam according to the prophetic tradition. And I argue that if we would do that, if we were able to achieve all these things from a community building, from a self-improvement standpoint in the Nation of Islam, without having all of the correct ideology, then how much more so will we be able to make progress now, having the correct ideology from a scholastic or a source standpoint, taking those best practices. We will be able to go any further, or even further. So it's a very, you know, it's a quagmire, and it really has our community in many places in a holding pattern. And even for myself, I try to look at it in the way that I heard Malcolm describe once. He said that for the Muslims, I'm too worldly, and for the Christians, I'm too Islamic or too religious. So we have to strike a balance, you know, in being engaged in the community and being engaged in those things that are going to help us establish economic self-sufficiency, community development, and all those other things, without thinking that our religious experience from the standpoint of being a good Muslim has to suffer.
Okay, now I'm going to take you to another area now. The issue of black self-genocide among many young black people, specifically many young black males, across the country, specifically in North New Jersey, Chicago, New York City, most urban areas are being plagued by this. And many of these casualties or these deaths are young Muslims, young African-American Muslims. The criticism, just to let you know, I've covered many marches of the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition, not marches, but rallies.
Right.
And the criticism has been from leaders of the NAVC that they have not seen any imams come out to any of these protest demonstrations, even when a Muslim young person is killed. What is the African American, and I'm not at all asking you to be a spokesman for African American Muslims, but would you be able to give us an idea, since you speak at these different masjids, mosques, and you speak to many African American imams, what is the African American Muslims' possible stance on self-genocide among young African Americans that is taking the lives of many young African American Muslims?
It has to be the stance that Islam commands us to take, the stance of the Quran, the stance of, you know, the last book of God, the revelation given to Muhammad. It has to be based upon what the Prophet gave us. We understand in Islam that to have killed one person unjustly is likened to have killed all of mankind, all of humanity. So it's something that every Muslim has to take serious. Now, having said that, and I know some of the brothers that are involved in the coalition, you know, Bashir, those brothers are good friends of mine. It's a valid criticism. It's a very valid criticism about the lack of Muslim engagement at the leadership level. And you do have some that are involved, not so much in Newark, but some of the other cities, you know, some of the imams are involved and they take these issues of the street very serious. But it goes back to the disconnecting. I think that's a byproduct of the quest for religiosity. So now a person is spending so much time dealing with scholastic issues, dealing with issues as we would call them in Islam of fiqh, you know, how to apply what we learned, you know, in an Islamic context. We spend so much time dealing with that we've left off the aspect of civic engagement, the most basic of those things being self-genocide and the prevention of it. And we can't make any Islamic excuse for it, because we know from the Prophet, one of the basic things he taught us, that none of us truly believe until we want for our brother what we want for ourselves. And we've seen commentary, and we can even stretch that to say that doesn't just include or is limited to the Muslims. So we want good for all of the people in society. If a person gets killed in our community, it doesn't just affect the the person that gets killed. It affects the Muslims and the innocent people. And this is just, you know, again, it's a problem that I hope that our leadership is going to get together and not find a solution, because it's an ongoing problem, but at least get their hands around what level of engagement we want to take in helping thwart that problem. I mean, we see that Minister Farrakhan and the nation is taking the lead on that. So we want to see the mainstream Sunni community get involved in that as well.
Several years ago, we witnessed the election of our first Muslim mayor. I believe it was down south of the Midwest. I'm sure you may know what I'm speaking of. This is a few years ago. I forgot his name escapes me right now.
Yeah, I know you're talking about, but he's not the first Muslim mayor. We had a Muslim mayor in Irvington, New Jersey, way before that.
Okay, yes, sir. Okay, what I wanted to ask, thank you for correcting me now. What I wanted to ask you now, and of course he's speaking about Mayor Wayne Smith.
Wayne Smith.
Okay, and I had no idea he was first.
Yeah, I had to correct that. He might be watching. I couldn't get
off
the show.
Listen, we appreciate it. We appreciate
my mayor.
How do you feel about Muslims in politics? Because, you know, there's some Muslims that believe, well, since this is a non-Muslim society, Muslims shouldn't be involved in the politics. You know, we have Representative Keith Ellison. Of course, you said Mayor Wayne Smith, and throughout the country, you have scattered Muslim representatives within Newark, New Jersey.
Right.
How do you feel about Muslims in politics?
Muslims have to be involved in politics, but Muslims don't become involved in politics just for the sake of being political or gaining the trappings of political office. Muslims should engage in politics and must engage in politics with the strategy, you know. And that strategy for the Muslim always has to be that we look to protect our principles even more than protecting our interests. Because our principles are going to be those things that are universal. They're going to transcend ethnicity. They're going to transcend what mosque we go to and all of those things. And those things are going to benefit everybody. And our best principles are principles that people in the common society also share as a common principle. So I really don't give a lot of credence or pay much attention to Muslims that say that we shouldn't be involved in politics. Case in point, all you have to do is look at CNN and you see all of these struggles that are happening in different parts of the country with Muslims being blocked from establishing mosques and Islamic centers and things like that. Let them not be engaged in politics and see how worse it will get. Because everything that we do as a Muslim community it has political implications. Everything needs to go. We want to open a facility. There's a zoning board. There's a planning board. All these things that impact our lives as Muslims, if we're not involved, then we just become a people that sit and watch the process happen to us without us being engaged in the process.
Are we ready to take phone calls? Back over. Oh, we have one call? Okay, yes, sir. Not as of yet.
Okay.
Not as of yet. They're going crazy back there. Like, keep it up. Do you ever feel that we're ever going to see now, despite the claims of about, say, I think it's like 4% of Americans, President Barack Obama is not a Muslim,
Right.
okay?
Right.
Do you feel, despite those claims of the 4% or 5%,
Yes.
that we will ever see a Muslim president of the United States?
No.
Oh, no.
My personal opinion, no. And politically, I don't think we'll have it. I think that America is so entrenched in the as they would call it, the Judeo-Christian tradition, that we'll never see it. Muslims will have impact and continue to make contributions, but I don't think that we'll ever see a time where there will be, as to use this term, or openly Muslim president.
Well, that just maybe not even 20 years ago, folks were saying that about having a black president, something similar. You do realize that there were folks saying
We realize that, but you can see
people were on TV saying that as well.
Certainly, I understand that, but I think most people, even the social scientists, that they probably would have projected that the color line would have been broken, and then the gender line would be broken next before you start to see, the lines broke along religious lines. I think that it's always going to be entrenched in the Christian tradition. I think that there will even be some time before you even see a Jewish president. And so I think Muslims will be further down the line, and Allah knows best. Everything is under his control, it's in his decree. But me, as a journalist and even as a student of political science, I don't think that we'll see it, at least not in my lifetime.
I believe they're signaling us. We have one phone call, is it? Can you put them through? We're waiting for you to be put through. Please wait patiently. Those of you just tuning in, this is 30 Frames a Second. I'm Doshad Farad, guest hosting for Nat Wood. We have with us lecturer and author Amin Nathari discussing African-American Muslim history as well as his books, 4535, the continuing of Islam in America, as well as Making It Plain, his various lectures and sermons. And he has several other books that he's already written, as well as one coming out, By Any Means Necessary, I believe it.
No, that one's already out.
That one is already out.
Yeah, we're working on something else.
Okay, they're ready for the call to come through? Oh, keep on going. Please tell us now, if you would, explain to us what is By Any Means Necessary about that book.
Briefly, it's actually called Muslim Unity by Any Means Necessary, and I caught a lot of flack even from some of my immigrant Muslim brothers, because when they hear the term by any means necessary, they automatically, put it within a radical or subversive context. And that made me tell people that you have to read the book, because in the intro I talk about the by any means necessary. I'm talking about establishing the unity of the Muslims by any permissible means necessary, meaning using, of course, the Quran, the prophetic tradition, and the reality of current events in 21st century America, which is the actual subtitle of the book. So that's just one of the 5 books in print. But in terms of our conversation today, I think that as we're getting ready to go into Black History Month, I think that the issues that are touched in 4535 now, as well as the overall issue of Islam and African American experience, is something that every American needs to, really come to terms with.
It's a very heavy book. When I went, I didn't just skim through it.
Yeah.
I went through the book. It's a very heavy book. You actually touched on some very pertinent topics in the book.
Thank you. Well,
relevant topics.
I think it's just, it's a discussion that needs to be had, and it's an ongoing discussion. And again, we don't make the disconnection, between Black history and American history. We said time and time again. Each month I always wind up being, not each month, each year I always wind up being on a month-long tour doing African American History Month. I'm usually addressing a lot of immigrant or mixed audiences, and one of the things I say that there's no American history without Black history. The two are connected, and by extension, we can look at Islamic history the same way.
We have as a call. Can you put them through?
Yes, assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Yes, sir. I've been listening to the show, and I have a few thoughts that I'd like to express. One of the thoughts that I would like to express is that when we're speaking about the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, and he was speaking about the direction that it went, or the direction that he thought it And my thought on that was that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's teaching, there was a specific idea that was being expressed to us, and in our lessons it shares with us that the idea that Allah had placed in the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was that to make us a perfect people, so that we could become a perfect people and become a perfect ruler. So, I mean, I understand what the brother was saying as far as, we need to be in different places. Like, some of us need to be in politics, some of us need to be in the grassroots, because we're a body, and as a body has many different functions.
Right.
However, I just would like to iterate the fact that I am a follower of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and my position is that is that I do for self. In other words, I focus on perfecting of myself and perfecting of everything that I do.
Caller, not trying to cut you off, but we have other calls. If you could make your point. I'm not at all trying to be rude, but we have other callers.
All right, brother. Well, that was it then.
Okay, no, thank you for calling. We appreciate it. Who else is on the line?
Hello?
Did you want to respond?
No. His point is well taken, and definitely, but I would make one correction. We strive for perfection. Perfection belongs to the Creator alone. So, we strive for it, and we fall short, and, we ask forgiveness for when we fall short, but we're never going to achieve perfection. So the thing is, as we say in Islam, is just, fear God and do as best as you can,
Who do we have on the line? Go ahead.
Hello? Hi.
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, great. Well, the one thing, I'm not Muslim, but the one thing that I see most is that with religion in general is that you purify oneself, and then with the purification of oneself, you then bring that purification to your tribe, if you will, and you then create a better society. And it doesn't necessarily have to, the tribe doesn't necessarily have to subscribe to your type of religion, but that if you're pure of heart, if you're pure of whatever, you're putting out your ideas of what needs to be, then you'll create a better society, if you can follow exactly what I'm saying.
Okay, is that it?
No,
we have other calls. That's what I'm saying. We have other calls. If you want.
Yes, I understand that. It's just that most people and most religions, there are false people that try to be pure of heart or act as though that they're pure of heart in their religion.
Sir, no, I understand, but once again, we have to get to other calls. We're going to allow him to respond. Thank you very much for calling.
Well, I have no response. But his point is valid from the standpoint of, self-purification. In Islam, we understand, there's a well-known verse. It's real brief. I'll just, in English, in the interest of time directly, it says, never will God change the condition of a people until people change themselves. So that directs us from the Muslim text, from the Islamic text, the Quran, that we look to ourselves first for change. And if everyone would just change themselves and better their own situation and work on their own shortcomings, then that permeates into society, and then by extension, you'll have a better society. So he's absolutely right. It starts first, with the individual, but certainly is going to always be a situation in every faith where there's going to be, people that will exalt one faith over another, and that's a person's personal preference if they think that their faith is superior. But at the end of the day, we all have to stand before, the one God, the one Lord who created us all.
Do we have any other calls? One more call? Put them through.
Hello?
Yes, you're online.
Hi, nice show.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. I know that the Bible was written in the old, what they call the Old Testament, is written in Greek, Aramaic, and something Latin. I think that's the Bible. Okay. Now there's Pan-Africanists that believe that Islam is not African. So perhaps you can shed some light on that, one more thing, the fact that you're talking about black Islam. This is very good. Dialogue is what we have to do. That's the only way we get understanding is through conversation. So this is this is a wonderful thing, and just maybe you can clarify the question that is. I know the Bible was written in Aramaic. Is Aramaic a language or is it a religion?
Okay, you know what? I'm gonna let you respond, but you know when I spoke with you a few minutes ago about the whole Arab slavery,
Right.
in terms of many people say that African American Muslims shouldn't be Muslims. You know, in 2009 it got very crazy on YouTube.
Yes.
Where you actually had folks literally. There were debates going on in Harlem.
Right.
There was one set of people were saying that Islam was not an African religion, therefore African Americans shouldn't be practicing it. Then you had Dr. Wesley Muhammad, who wrote a book. He's a noted scholar, historian, and many Muslims that speak about his book, I believe the African Origin of Islam, many of them say it was a very excellent book.
Right.
We're going to ask you to respond to what the caller had said.
Well, I mean, I'm just going to give a short response. Islam is a religion, a way of life that supersedes any ethnicity or ethnic origin, any land or whatever. A person could be European and be Muslim, a person can be African and be Muslim, a person can be from any part of the world, any culture, whatever, and be a Muslim. So, you can have a debate with the Pan-Africanists about whether or not, Islam is an African religion. And certainly we know that Islam had, an indelible imprint, in the continent of Africa then and even still now. I've been to Africa. I spent a month in Kenya. So, I mean, it's not like we're going to be able to disconnect Islam from Africa. But certainly, Islam, is religion. It's a way of life that transcends any ethnicity. You don't have to be of any particular ethnicity or ethnic origin in order to be a Muslim. And one isn't superior to Arabs, not superior over the non-Arab, as the Prophet told us. The African isn't superior over the white person. The only thing that makes us superior is our obedience to our Lord, our obedience to the Creator.
I believe we have another phone call. Put them through.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the line. You're on air, excuse me.
All right, this is a brilliant show. As always, I'm enjoying it.
Thank you. Thanks for tuning in.
The question I'm about to ask is in no way trying to stump you or anything. I just happen to be looking at YouTube and whatnot, and they happen to be in a particular category dealing with gangs, Bloods, and Crips and so on. And I noticed a lot of these brothers and whatnot were talking about how they were Muslim and so on and so forth. And I just had, I had to ask myself, and I'm asking you, is it possible to be in a street gang and still claim to be Islam, a practicing Muslim?
That's a very good question. And honestly, I've had dialogue with brothers who've actually had that position that the street organizations or gangs, as they're commonly referred to, that's a culture where Islam is a religion, in a way of life. As a Muslim, we can't make that argument, in any sincerity or with any sincerity, because the negative aspects of those street organizations, the gang component as we know it and how it exists and manifests itself in the streets of urban America, is something that's totally antithetical to Islam. This widespread violence and misogyny and all these things that we know that reflect the worst of gang culture. So no, a person could be a Muslim and be in a gang the same way you could be, and I hate to keep making this analogy, the same way you could be in the Ku Klux Klan and be a Christian. But you can't be a good practicing Muslim and be in a gang, because at the end of the day, your allegiance has to be to God in the way of this prophet, the prophetic tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, to whom the Quran was revealed, that has to supersede your gang affiliation. And until a person is willing to make that step, then they can't be a good practicing Muslim and be in a gang.
Any more calls? Okay, well, listen up. Okay, I want to take you to another area now.
Okay.
Throughout the country, you have Catholic universities, you have Methodist universities. Are any American Muslim organizations, have they been discussing perhaps building Muslim universities? I remember there used to be a Muslim teachers college in Virginia.
Yeah, exactly.
Anything on the blueprints for that?
No, there's one that exists now actually, and it's it's still in I won't say they're beyond the formative stages, but they're really getting more embedded, in the academic circle, which is Zaytuna College in California. It started as Zaytuna Institute. Now it's actually an accredited college. out in California, Hayward, California, which is in the Berkeley area, and it's headed by Imam Hamza Yusuf and Imam Zaid Shakir, an African American convert to Islam. Used to be an imam here in our area in Connecticut for years. So there's efforts that have been made. That's the first full-fledged college, and then there's other things that have been done on like the institute level where the people are able to get college credits toward those things. And then you have some of the immigrant organizations that actually have colleges. There's a few in the Virginia area. So there's been efforts that are made, and certainly there's going to be more efforts, and again, this is just part of just the growing landscape of Islam in America. As Islam continues to grow, you're going to see more presence of Islam at the higher education level.
Now, it's been said by many that one of the reasons the Islamic community in America has not been able to advance is because there are too many things in American society that somewhat contradict Islam, such as banks. Now, it's our understanding that Islam prohibits charging interest. But you've had Muslims talk about, of course, during the days of the Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad, you all owned a bank, I believe.
Yes.
How do Muslims wrestle with that? How is it that how were you able to get around certain contradictions of Islam to, most banks in America
are based on it. Well, let me preface my remarks by saying I'm not a scholar of fiqh, and and the scholars are having these discussions now. You have some that will argue that because the whole banking system of America is an interest-based system, that we have to have some involvement in it. And then there's others that will shun it completely. I think that the end result of the research is going to be that our paradigm is going to have to arrive in the middle. And like I said, again, prefacing, I'm not a scholar, we know that in Islam there is a mechanism that allows for a person, to charge not what would be called interest, but passing on some of the cost of the transaction to the person that he's transacting with. So we have to begin to look at things in a broad and practical manner, and not just paint everything to be forbidden or permitted with just one broad stroke of a brush. And when we're trying to navigate the landscape of Islam in 21st century America, these are the challenges we're going to have to face, and that's going to have to be done by those scholars that understand America, that understand the banking systems and the legal systems and all of these things. I think that they would be better and more suited to appropriate the Islamic traditions and then balance them against what we know exists in the American society.
I believe we have us another call. Can you put them through?
Hello, good afternoon.
You're on air. Good afternoon. Welcome.
How are you guys doing?
Quite
Good,
fine.
good.
Thanks for tuning in.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuhu.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
I have a question for the brother. Is he from the Nation of Islam? Is he?
You're talking about Amin Nathari?
Right.
I'm sorry. You're asking.
The glasses.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're asking. We're both wearing glasses, but you're asking him what? You said, is he in the Nation of Islam?
Yeah,
No, I'm not in the Nation. I'm not a member of the Nation of Islam.
but he is, right?
Excuse me?
Okay, I have a question, but he might not answer it, but he might know the answer probably, or just tell me why is that happening. So I have noticed Farrakhan, when he speaks, he only mentions quotations from the Bible, and he barely mentions quotations from the Quran. I mean, if he's a Muslim, why is he doing that?
Okay. Well, the short answer, I certainly can't speak for Minister Farrakhan, but I think he does both. But certainly he does reference the Bible quite often because he's speaking usually to a Christian audience or to people that come from Christian families. So oftentimes we'll see him use the Bible as the basis of his text and then try to find something that's maybe comparable or complementary in the Quran. So, that's a matter of his personal preference. That's part of his teaching. And, far be it for me to say, what he should lead with and what he shouldn't lead with.
We have any more calls? Thank you for calling. Okay, wow. Okay, now you were speaking about these institutions, banking now. We have many Muslim rappers, Most Def, Freeway.
Right. Lupe Fiasco.
Lupe Fiasco, definitely. Now, have you ever come in contact with any of these rappers? Have you worked with any of them?
I haven't worked with any of them, but Yasin, we know him. We know his family. He attends Master Taqwa under the leadership of Imam Siraj. So we don't have.
Now you said Yasin. Who's Yasin?
Yasin, that's the artist formerly known as Most Def.
Okay.
Yasin Bey.
Okay, definitely. Now we want to know now concerning another issue that has come up. Now, dealing with many of the liquor stores. One time I attended a mosque. I was in St. Louis, okay, and the majority population of this particular mosque, they were Arab and Middle Eastern. And the imam had addressed concern. I had a private meeting with this particular imam, and he said that he asked members of the congregation, how many of you own liquor stores in here? And he said the majority of them raised their hands.
Right.
How would you respond to the fact that, and I'm not at all asking you to get into a us versus them, but how would you respond to the fact that many Muslims that come from other countries, when they do open up liquor stores, they for some reason always find their ways to African American communities? How does I've never seen anyone really go on.
We won't limit it to just liquor store. The chicken shacks, all these other things. People come in, unfortunately for them, unfortunately for us, they're able to identify what our people spend money on. And because some of them come here certainly for good things, for religion and for better family life, but many of them come just for the American dream, for the dollar. So for them, from a business standpoint, it makes sense for them to just come into an area where they know what the people buy, what the people spend their money on, and those are the products that they'll sell.
Now, have you ever spoken with?
Oh, we speak with them all the time, and honestly, we take a hard stance because Islam doesn't. I mean, Islam condemns this kind of thing.
What are some of the justifications that you've heard? Some of the excuses?
Oh well, we hear all kind of things. It's America, everything is corrupt. We just trying to make a living, but we understand Islam. Again, to quote this, what our prophet said. Allah, God is pure, and He only loves and takes that which is pure. So we never think that it's okay that we can engage in, things that lead to corruption or the moral degradation of our communities, and that we can find some way to make some Islamic excuse for it. So, and this is something that happens throughout urban America. I remember they said Imam Zaid and some of the imams were involved in a campaign in Chicago, where they actually did a survey. This is my brothers out at Iman, the Inner City Muslim Action Network. They were involved in this campaign as well. They did a study of the liquor stores in the area. They said that more than probably a third, close to half, were owned by Arab or immigrant Muslims, and they went on a campaign to get these places to close down.
There was a Catholic priest by the name of Father Flegger in Chicago. He was actually involved in that campaign.
Absolutely. So that was something that it was the interfaith effort, to address something that we as Muslims need to address ourselves. We need to police ourselves in that regard.
But the question is, why specifically come to the African American community? Why not go? You said Chicago. Why not set up a liquor store in Aurora, Illinois? Who's spending money on the hood, man? But it's on liquor more than people in the hood. Who's buying more fried chicken than our people? And me and my father used to joke, when we established the mosque in the 4th Avenue area and we looked at the landscape of just urban America, Newark, Irvington, or whatever, we used to joke and say, it's like someone would give people a map and show them that these are where black people are. You go and set up the businesses and just sell them things that we know that they buy, that have no benefit for them, and that they'll buy it. So that they come and they become entrenched economically in the community, and we can't blame them because we need to be proactive and take those same stores that they will come and occupy and go into business for ourselves and sell things that would benefit our communities. We can have fresh groceries and fresh fruit and all these other things, and we won't have room in our communities for liquor stores. But the places stay abandoned for years, and then people migrate from whatever lands, and they come and they spend money on what they've seen images of black people spending money on, even in their own country. Okay, but I remember now when you and your father first set up that particular mosque in 4th Avenue East, I didn't see too many liquor stores in that.
Well, we won't say me and my father would hate say me and my father and the brothers that worked along with us. There was one liquor store there, but that was just an example. Go beyond liquor store, just even the whole idea of us setting up businesses, period. When we first came to that particular area in East Orange, New Jersey, there were 2 Muslim-owned businesses in the 4th Avenue business area. When I left from being the imam at the end of 5.5 years, there were 12 Muslim-owned businesses. But none of them were owned by the mosque. So what does that show us? That other people come and they understand economic development, they understand community development, where we become just fixated on the religious or the spiritual aspects not understanding or not making the connection that even going into business, that there's a spiritual component and a spiritual mandate in that. So we have to begin to work on both sides of the equation, both sides of the aisle.
Well, listen up. As we wind down, I want to ask what are your latest projects, your latest ventures? Because I'm sure you have frequent flyer miles right and left.
Frequent train and flyer miles. Alhamdulillah, Allah's been merciful. Again, as I say now, we're on this project moving ahead to 20 years, and I'm really trying to now just frame out the narrative of where we want to see Islam in America go forward from here, going forward in the 21st century America. So part of that is two projects I'm involved in. One is we're going to roll out full scale, we hope by the fall of this year, when we hit the 20-year mark, the Islam in America movement, which is a national organization that we've been working on behind the scenes for 5 years now. Just identifying people in other parts of the country that have similar goals, similar values, similar interests that they want to achieve, and see how we can work together collectively. So that's one piece. And then the other piece is, which is very important to me, is my memoir that I'm working on now, that I've tentatively titled Going Back to Move Forward. My life growing up a Muslim and black man in America. And I'm really committed to that because, as you know, we just lost another one of our elders recently, Imam Pasha. May Allah have mercy on him. And we're losing so many elders.
Just to clarify, now, which Imam Pasha?
Imam Pasha Salahuddin from Patterson. We know the Imam Pasha from New York is alive and well. We were with him on Saturday at the Sierra conference. And we're losing so many elders. So I think that I want to get this memoir done just to document my own journey. Being a person who grew up in the Nation of Islam, made the transition, went on to normal life as a teenager, then went on to college, became a DJ and all these other things, and then came full circle where I left the music industry in '93 to go into, as we would say, a full-time service or Islamic work.
Now, wow, another Muslim imam, imam DJ. I remember they said that about another one of these stars. I'm not gonna mention who he is. We have us another phone call. Oh, no, okay, well, listen up. We're getting ready to, okay, well, I'm sorry, I thought we had another phone call. But
That's
anyway, now, if you would, please tell us, now, this is what I want to ask you a question now. Ed Gordon had did a show with Qasim. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I misheard the producer. Anyway, we thank you for joining us. We want to thank Amin Nathari.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to 30 Frames a Second. We shall be back next week. Thank you for your phone calls. I'm Doshad Farad. See you next time.